Hey guys, I've been a Challenger player since set 3 and they recently just dropped the C patch a few days ago. Just thought that I'd release a flex guide before the big one next week. Basically, they nerfed the amount of gold you get from the Ezreal Legend. This is going to make it a lot harder to get to level 8. They nerfed Kai'Sa and they also nerfed Lux, which is basically the two most strong level 8 comps in the previous meta. What this means is that it's a lot harder to get to 8 now, and also the level 8 comps are a lot weaker. This basically just opens up the meta to a lot of these reroll comps, which are already pretty decent in my opinion. For example, Kayle, Zed, Warwick, Noxus, Multicasters, Akshan, and Jinx. These are all very strong in the current meta right now. However, I do think that the Ionia and the Azir Lux comp are still good. I think the Ionia comp is slightly better than Azir Lux just because Ionia has a lot more outs than Azir Lux, and it's also a cheaper board. So if you still hit these boards, it's definitely still a top 3 or top 4. But these reroll comps are very strong right now. Because if the whole lobby is playing reroll, you're sort of in a more advantageous spot from playing reroll as well, just because everyone else is taking out all of the 2 and 3 cost units out of the pool, making it easier for you to hit. The S tier comps, it's going to be Noxus, Kayle, Zed, Akshan, and Ionia. And the A tier comps, these are still very strong, but it's dependent on certain conditions, like certain augments, or if you just manage to hit your units. Piltover at 2-1 is still good, Azir Lux is still good. Multicaster is still good, but this is sort of reliant on you hitting double trouble, or there is an augment where it buffs your whole team's HP if you're playing 2 cost units. That one's really good for this one as well. And I think Trickster's Glass is also really good just because your team scales off more Talias, and Trickster's Glass just gives you a second 3-star Talia. Warwick reroll is good if you have Ravenous Hydra, and Jinx reroll is good if you get a robotic arm. For Legends, I recommend Poro and Ornn. These two are just going to be the dominant ones right now. Poro just because Poro is always going to be good. And Ornn, the Ornn items have a very strong placement right now in the current meta. I think these are also decent as well, but not going to go too much into these. These are going to be the very strong augments that you want to take. Refer to the doc I link in the comments if you want to see them. And yep, I'll jump straight into the guide. So the first comp I'll be covering is just going to be Reroll Jinx. You only want to play towards this comp if you check your Zon enhancement and its robotic arm. If you do, then you just play standard until stage 3-2, and then if you're uncontested, get slight roll for a board like this. Basically, you try to want to stabilize a little at 3-2 because you don't want to lose too much HP between 3-2 and 4-1. You need to econ back up and still roll above 50 to hit your 3-star Jinx, Vi, and Warwick. Warwick is not as important, but this Vi and this Jinx is very important just because Vi is going to be your main tank. You're going to put 3 tank items on your Vi and 3 damage items on your Jinx. For itemization, Jinx really likes Runehands +2. In the current meta, I recommend John Slayer just because a lot of people are playing reroll comps. So John Slayer is going to have a lot of value just because you're going to have a lot of HP. The third item is pretty open. Last Whisper is good, Gwensu is good, IE is good. Even Edge of Night is good just because there's a lot of these rogue players that just jump to your backline. This guarantees that Jinx is going to stay alive until the very end. At level 8, so after you hit your Vi and your Jinx, you can push levels. And then at level 8, you have a few options. You could play around 4 Gunners. For example, you could play Zeri and Tristana. If you later find the Senna, it could look like this. You also have the option of playing Urgot as well. And if you're playing Urgot instead of the 4 Gunners, you could just play something like a Sejuani for 2 Bruisers. If you don't hit the Urgot, you could also play something like an Ashe for 2 Freljord. This helps out if you don't have the Last Whisper. But later on, your cap board is probably going to look like this. One little tip is that in this comp, even though you're playing Piltover, you don't want to use it the same way as the normal variant. Basically, the reason why we keep the Piltover in the Zeri comp is because you lack a good front line. But in this comp, you're going to have 3-star Vi, 3-star Warwick. Your front line is actually going to be pretty good. What you actually want to do with Piltover in this comp is, because you're not going to have a lot of stacks anyway, you just wait until you have enough stacks for that breakpoint where it gives you a component, and then you just sell it and get more items. That way, you're going to be able to itemize your Vi, Jinx, later on your Urgot, Senna, Zeri, etc. So next comp on the list is just going to be Reroll Zed. So for Reroll Zed, I would only play Reroll Zed if I already have a few good components for him and I get like a random early Zed. Or if I get a very good augment for him. You can check the doc for what augments are good for Reroll Zed. Basically, at level 6, you want to slight roll for a board like this. This is going to be a very realistic level 6 board that you can hit that will stabilize you. However, even though this is the board you're rolling for, you're probably not going to be playing this Warwick and this Irelia late game. Later on, your level 7 board will be different. It's going to look something like this, but this will be the realistic board that you can hit. Once you hit this, you econ back up and slow roll for 3-star Zed, hold all the Katarinas. You can play Katarina over this if you want. And if you're very close to a set, you can also go for the set 3. If you hit the set 3, you itemize the set with tank items as well. After you hit the set Z3, you push levels, go 7, and then play a board like this. In the off chance that you do hit Katarina 3, you want to itemize her like the following: Spark +2. Spark is really good just because she jumps to the back line and shreds all of their MR, and then your Gwen and Katarina will clean up. The other 2 items are going to be Hodge and JG. If you end up hitting the set 3, one cool thing is you could do is to backline all of your other shitters. This way, your Zed and Katarina will jump to the back immediately, and then all aggro will go on their set. And because set is tanky enough to be a solo tank, your Zed and your Katarina will be able to clean up. Next comp on the list is just going to be Warwick. So Warwick is a comp that you could only play if you get the hero augment for him. I believe it was called Ravenous Hydra. Basically, the game plan for this is if the moment you get that augment, you just hard force this comp. You play standard until stage 3-2. Surprisingly, you're going to win a decent amount of fights just because a 1-star Warwick with the augment is pretty good, as long as you have the right item set up for him. And at level 6, you generally want to slight roll for a stable board. The board I generally like to go for is 4 Juggernaut, 2 Zon, and 2 Challenger, so a board like this. And then basically you slow roll above 50 for Warwick 3, and if you hit the set 3 is pretty good as well, but not required. This is the only unit you need. After you hit the Warwick 3, you just push levels. So because you're going to be broke, you sort of just want to place whatever units you find to get in. So for example, if you're close to 6 Juggernauts, you play 6 Juggernauts. If you're close to 4 Challengers, you play 4 Challengers. If you get a Juggernaut +1, you want to play towards 6. But generally, a cap board for this might look something like this. You're just playing around 4 Challengers, 4 Juggernauts. Itemization for Warwick is quite important. He really needs best in slot. I think, I know for a fact that Gwynsu's, BT, and QSS is the best in slot for Warwick. Comp on the list is just going to be Reroll Akshan. So for this comp, it's actually a lot simpler than the other ones. Basically, you just play standard until level 7. You want to play towards Reroll Akshan if you're playing around an Akshan early and you have a lot of AD items. Basically, at level 7, you roll down for a stable board. For example, a board like this. And then you slow roll at level 7 for... Well, you don't really slow roll. At level 7, you roll down until your first stable board. And then you econ back up. And then you do another big roll down later for Akshan 3 and Lissandra 3. All your tank items are going to go on Sedrani. And you only want to really focus on items for Lissandra if you actually do end up hitting the Lissandra 3. If you do, items that Lissandra really likes is actually very similar to Kaisa items. So I would put something like Morello on her, Shojin, Archangels is decent, GS, Hodge, Guardbreaker, all pretty good on Lissandra. You just throw all of your leftover items on her. At level 8, you just throw in a random unit that you find. For example, like a Senna or a Cassante or a Heimerdinger is good. You could also drop out of like this Renekton. Renekton is a pretty shitty unit. So you just play a 3rd Shurima unit. One option you have is to play Jarvan and a Azir. This gives you 3 Shurima and 2 Strategists. You also have the option of dropping out of this and playing Cassante and Sion instead. Okay, where's Cassante? Where the fuck is Cassante? Okay, here. Cassante and Sion. And then you would have a very good front line, and then your Lissandra and your Akshan will basically just shred their team until they die. Next comp on the list is going to be Reroll Noxus. So Reroll Noxus is probably the reroll comp with one of the highest caps, just next to Reroll Kayle. So for this comp, it's a very tempo-oriented comp, which means that you really want to win a lot of your early and mid-game fights if possible, because you need that health to econ back up to go for these expensive 3-cost units, 3-star 3-cost units. So for example, like let's say you get like a Darius early, 2-star Samira, and a random Swain. You could try to play for a streak between stage 1 and stage 3, and then stage 3-2 you roll down again for a 6 Noxus board and try to win all 3-4-1, econ back up, and then go for the 3-star Darius and the Katarina. In a lot of games, you might not actually hit both. So if you're only close to a Darius 3, the itemization for Katarina 3 is not as important because your main carry is just going to be the Katarina, but you do want both if possible. For itemization, Darius really likes those bruiser items and AD items. So for example, this is a pretty decent combination, BT, Hodge, GS. GS is good just because in the current meta, a lot of people are playing reroll comps with a lot of HP. You could also go BT Titans, and then you could also go BT Titans. You could also go Deathblade is also good. Last Whisper, IE is also pretty good as well. If you're playing Ornn, Death's Defiance is quite good on Darius as well. Katarina just likes the typical Spark +2. So for example, Spark, Hodge, and JG is the best in slot for Katarina, but the other 2 are pretty flex. At level 7, depending on who your main carry is, if your main carry is Darius, you ideally want to tech in a 2nd Juggernaut. The Juggernaut I personally like to play is Nasus. And then if your main carry is a Katarina, for example, you have like a Katarina 3 randomly, but not a Darius, You could just tech around the rogue instead. So you could play something like an Echo for 2 rogue. If you happen to get a Noxus +1, you could probably put the Noxus or the Noxus +1 on the Nasus. According to stats, Nasus is the best user. And if you're doing this, you could probably just drop like the Cassiopeia or something. And then at level 8, you just play like a random legendary unit. At level 8, you just play a random legendary unit you find. So next comp on the list is just going to be Reroll Kayle. This comp is very straightforward. It's basically the exact same thing as Tristana, except the carry is just going to be Kayle. Basically, you just want to make sure you're not contested, but you want to 5 lose into the first minion round. And then you roll until 33 gold at level 4. And then you slow roll above 50 gold at level 5 for 3-star Maokai, Poppy, and Kayle. Itemization wise, Kayle best in slot is just going to be double Gwynsuit, and you get the 3rd Radiant item from Demacia. And Poppy just wants all of your tank items. And basically the game plan is you just want to 3-star these 3 units, and then you make your Poppy a 4-star, and then you carry your Kayle. You push levels because Kayle scales with your player level. If you're able to get to level 9, you win the game. Basically at level 6, what you're looking for is going to be a 3rd Demacia unit. So Galio is just fine. This gives your Kayle the 3rd item. But eventually you want to find a Jarvan instead. So for example, something like this. This also gives you 2 strategists with Teemo. Eventually you drop the Teemo for Heimerdinger. Later on, your super cap board is going to look something like this. Here, you notice you drop the Teemo for the Heimer, and you're just playing a bunch of Slayers to get that 5 Slayer bonus. Next comp on the list is just going to be Reroll Multicasters. There's actually 2 different variants for this. One is going to be Reroll Talia, and the other one is going to be Reroll Vel'Koz. Both are good in specific conditions. So for Talia, she's really good if you're playing Double Trouble or the hero or the Augment 2 healthy. Basically, 2 healthy makes you play around all these 2-cost units. So Talia, Teemo, Swain, Set. And in this comp in particular, it's funny because the comp scales well with more knockouts and more Talias. So this is actually perfect. Along with Double Trouble as well, it forces you to play around a similar board. You generally want to slow roll at level 6 for this board. For Set 3 and Talia 3, tank items on the Set, and then all your AP items on your Talia. And if you find any chalices, you put them on the Teemo. Talia really likes 1 mana item and 2 damage items. So for example, this setup is good. Blue buff could also be a replacement for Shojin. And then the AP items are just typical AP items that you put on any AP carry. One cool trick you could do in this comp is if you're playing Ornn, you can actually put Trickster's Glass on the Talia, which basically gives you another 3-star Talia. This potentially lets you play around a board with 3 Talias, which gives you more damage for each of your knockups. At level 7 and 8, you just want to push levels and play around more units that have more knockups. So for example, units that have knockups are stuff like Jarvan. Sion is quite good, and also Cassante has a knockup built into him as well. So something like this. So the other unit or the other board you want to consider playing around is Reroll Vel'Koz. I would only play around Reroll Vel'Koz if you have a Sorc +1. Actually, you don't even need the Sorc +1 to play around it. It's just that this comp gets a lot stronger with it, just because at level 7 you fit a board like this. And because you're going to be rerolling for the Sona as well, the Sorc Spat is going to go in the Sona, and this makes your board a lot stronger. For this comp, you want to go for a 3-star Swain, Sona, and Vel'Koz, slow roll at level 7, tank items on the Swain, and then all the AP items on your Vel'Koz, and all your remaining items on your Sona and your Lux. For Vel'Koz, he really likes 1 mana item and 2 damage items. So it's probably going to be Shojin, JG, and Gunblade. It could also be Guardbreaker, Deathcap, Hodge is also fine. And this Shojin could also be a blue buff if you don't have a Shojin. Next up is going to be Ionia Challengers. So I actually think this comp is still really good. Probably the strongest level 8 comp in the current meta right now. Stronger than Azir, just because this comp has a lot more outs and is a bit cheaper, because in Azir you kind of need to hit all of those 4-cost units, where in this comp you really need to only hit a 2-star Yasuo or a 2-star Kai'Sa. So the level 7 variant that I think is the strongest right now is actually going to be playing around 6 Challengers and 3 Ionias. So your board is going to look like this. So previously in the B patch, RFC and Edge of Night was really good just because Azir was very strong. It basically guaranteed Yasuo to snipe their Lux or Azir in the backline and one-shot them, and then focus on all the other units. However, in the current meta, Azir Lux is not as popular anymore, which makes RFC a lot weaker, because there's all of these reroll comps and you kind of just need to burst through them. It doesn't matter if you get to their backline, because most of their damage is in their front line anyway. So I would recommend an item setup like this, GS or GA, just to make sure that Yasuo doesn't die, and 2 damage items, i.e. and Hodge, is quite good. And for AP items, you usually just want to stack the Kaisa. If you don't find the Kaisa, or if you don't find the Kaisa 2, you probably just stack the Kalista for now. Later on, you just transfer over all of the set items to your Shen and all of the Kalista items to your Kaisa. So if you don't hit this board, there are 2 other variants you can play. The other variant is just going to be the 6 Ionia variant, where you just itemize the Karma and the Yasuo. And the third variant is if you're playing around the Shadow Owls variant, where you would potentially itemize the Gwen and the Yasuo / Kalista or Kaisa. So final comp I'll be covering is just going to be Azir Lux. I also talked about this in my last guide. I won't go too in detail about this, but basically this is the level 7 board you want to play around. And then at level 8, you just throw in a Teemo for 4 Strategists and 2 Multicaster. The problem with Azir Lux, however, is that it relies on you hitting the 2-star Nasus, Jarvan, Azir, and Lux, which in my opinion is like pretty high roll. And considering that if you don't hit a lot of these units, you're just going to get run over by all these reroll comps, it's like not as good as Ionia Challengers, just because I feel like this comp has less outs than the other comp. Basically, this board is very static. You kind of need Azir Lux for like this perfect synergy setup. I guess that if you don't hit the Lux, you could probably swap out Lux and Garen for Warwick Kaisa and have Kaisa hold all of your Lux items. But otherwise, level 8, you really do want to play into the Lux. One thing to note is that in this comp, they nerfed Lux. Basically, she has like a higher mana cost now or something. So I would prioritize itemizing the Azir over the Lux. Lux is going to be your secondary carry. And you really do want all of your tank items on your Nasus. But depending on who you 2-star first, Jarvan or Nasus, just throw all your tank items on your main tank. For itemization, Azir really likes Gunblade, Shiv +1. The third item is pretty flexible. Any attack speed or AP item is fine. And Lux really likes Shojin +2. So Shojin, Gunblade, and then you get the third Radiant item from Demacia. So this sums up my 13.13c flex guide. As always, if you guys found this video helpful, would really appreciate the sub on YouTube or follow on Twitch. I linked the document for this below in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next patch.